In the spring of 1907, a British expedition departed Manaus and pushed into an unmapped region of the Amazon basin marked only as terra incognita. Their mission was straightforward: survey the terrain, document any pre-Columbian sites, return with maps for the Royal Geographical Society. The first week passed in methodical progress as cartographer Samuel Brennan recorded coordinates and sketched topographical features. Then the jungle began to feel wrong. Bird calls ceased. The indigenous guide Kaio grew silent, his warnings reduced to sidelong glances at the towering canopy. On weathered stones along the riverbank, Brennan found inscriptions his Oxford education couldn't translate. "Beyond lies the kingdom of the bone-eaters," Kaio finally whispered. Commander Aldridge dismissed it as superstition meant to guard hunting territory. But that evening, making camp in a clearing, they discovered something that defied rational explanation. A carved stone pillar rose 12 feet from the jungle floor, depicting humanoid figures of vastly different scales. And arranged in concentric circles around its base lay dozens of human skulls, each one split open in precisely the same way. They pressed deeper into territory no European had charted, and the wrongness compounded with each mile. Brennan noticed it first in the architecture. Scattered through the undergrowth lay stone foundations too vast for ordinary dwellings. Doorway lintels rose 15 feet above the forest floor, their proportions suggesting structures built for inhabitants of impossible height. He sketched them methodically in his journal, annotations growing increasingly uncertain. Ceremonial, perhaps, symbolic of gods rather than men. Dr. Henley called out from a collapsed structure half consumed by strangler figures. He'd unearthed stone tools that challenged every assumption about the region's inhabitants. A grinding bowl carved from granite, so massive it would require 3 strong men to lift. Axes with handles thick as ship timbers, their cutting edges still sharp despite centuries of weathering. The botanist turned one over in his hands, expression troubled. "No man could wield this in combat or labor," he said quietly. "These are built for something else entirely." Aldridge examined the implements with fast skepticism. Giants were a common motif in primitive cultures, he declared. These were clearly ritualistic objects, perhaps used in ceremonies to honor mythological beings. Brennan wanted desperately to believe him. He recorded the commander's theory in his notes, though his hand trembled slightly as he wrote. The afternoon brought a discovery that shattered all pretense of rational explanation. They stumbled into a clearing where stone benches formed a rough circle around a central platform. The seats stood waist-high to Brennan, their surfaces worn smooth by long use. But it was what lay upon the platform that stopped them cold. Human long bones, dozens of them, split lengthwise with methodical precision. The marrow cavities gaped empty. Graves knelt beside one, running his finger along the fracture line. "These breaks are fresh," he said, voice flat. "Days old, perhaps a week." The jungle seemed to press closer around them, the air thick and watchful. Kaio had vanished into the tree line, refusing to approach the site. Even Aldridge's confidence wavered as he studied the arranged bones, their number suggesting not an isolated incident, but systematic practice. Marcus Webb broke the terrible silence. He needed elevation for a proper survey, he announced, already shrugging into his equipment harness. A ridge rose to the east, offering vantage over the valley ahead. He'd climb it, take his measurements, return within 2 hours. Brennan watched him disappear into the dense vegetation, compass in hand, moving with the easy confidence of a man who believed in maps and measurements and the ordered world they represented. 2 hours passed, then 3. They called Webb's name until their voices went hoarse, the sound swallowed by the indifferent jungle. By nightfall, the surveyor had not returned, and something vast moved through the darkness beyond their firelight, circling with patient deliberation. When dawn came, Marcus Webb's screams had long since faded into memory, and the expedition understood with cold certainty that they were no longer the ones conducting the survey. They found Webb's equipment at mid-morning, arranged in a clearing with unsettling precision. His surveying theodolite stood centered on a flat stone, compass beside it, both instruments carefully positioned as if on display. His clothing lay folded in a neat stack, shirt atop trousers atop boots, each item placed with deliberate care. The scene possessed the quality of a museum exhibit, everything present except the man himself. Brennan's hands shook as he sketched the arrangement. This was not the chaotic aftermath of an animal attack or a panicked flight. Someone had curated this display with intelligence and purpose. The theodolite's lens caught the morning light, and for a moment Brennan imagined Webb's final minutes, forced to undress while something watched with alien curiosity. Graves discovered the trail leading into the tree line, marked by disturbed earth and broken vegetation. They followed it 30 yards to a massive kapok tree, its trunk wider than 3 men standing abreast. Fresh blood painted the bark in arterial spray patterns that began 9 feet above the ground and descended in long streaks toward the roots. Dr. Henley pressed his palm against the stain, measuring the height with evident distress. No man could reach this high, he whispered, not without climbing first. Aldridge ordered camp made in a defensive position, firearms loaded and within reach. As darkness fell, the jungle came alive with sounds that defied natural explanation. Deep vocalizations rolled through the trees, resonant and deliberate, carrying across impossible distances. They were not animal calls, but something closer to speech, syllables stretched and distorted through throats not shaped for human language. The sounds came from multiple directions, north and south and west, coordinated responses that suggested communication rather than random noise. Brennan lay rigid in his bedroll, listening to the conversation happening in the darkness around them. Call and response, question and answer. The giants were discussing the expedition with the casual certainty of predators planning a kill. Near midnight, Graves spotted movement beyond the firelight and fired without hesitation. The rifle's crack echoed through the canopy, followed by a sound that stopped Brennan's breath. Heavy footfalls, each impact transmitted through the earth like minor tremors, retreating into the jungle with shocking speed for something of such evident mass. They counted 7 distinct footfalls before silence returned, heavier and more oppressive than before. Dawn brought no relief. Brennan emerged from his tent to find the others staring upward, their faces slack with horror. Directly above where he'd slept, suspended from a vine, hung a human femur still dark with dried blood. Fresh carvings covered its surface, symbols that might have been warnings or territorial marks or something worse. The bone twisted slowly in the morning breeze, and Brennan understood with sickening clarity that the giants had stood over him in the darkness, close enough to touch, and chosen to let him wake one more time. The message was unmistakable. They were not hunting the expedition. They were playing with it. Kaio refused to move forward. The guide stood at the edge of their camp, shaking his head with increasing desperation as Aldridge insisted they continue. "We must know Webb's fate," the commander declared, voice tight with something between duty and obsession. "We cannot return without certainty." Kaio's response came in fractured English and urgent gestures toward the path behind them. "No certainty here," he said. "Only death that walks on 2 legs and eats with purpose." Aldridge overruled him. They would advance 2 miles, no more, to gain elevation and survey the valley ahead. If they found no trace of Webb, they would retreat to the river and abandon the interior survey. It was a compromise that satisfied no one, least of all Kaio. who followed at a distance with the expression of a man attending his own funeral. The ridge appeared suddenly through a break in the canopy, offering a vantage point across a hidden valley that no European map acknowledged. Brennan approached the edge and felt his understanding of the world collapse. Below them spread a settlement of impossible scale. Longhouses stretched 50 yards in length, their ridge poles rising 30 feet above stone foundations that spoke of permanence rather than temporary encampment. Raised platforms connected the structures, and cooking fires sent smoke drifting through the valley in lazy columns. Through his field glasses, Brennan witnessed them. The giants moved with deliberate purpose between the structures, their frames powerfully built and grotesquely human in proportion. They stood twice the height of any man he'd known, perhaps more, their bodies adorned with elaborate necklaces of bone and teeth that clicked softly as they moved. Hide garments covered their lower bodies, and their skin bore intricate scarification patterns that might have been decorative or tribal markers. Several gathered around a central platform, where fresh meat lay arranged for processing. Brennan watched them work with tools sized for their massive hands, methodical and practiced in their butchery. Large game, he told himself. Tapir perhaps, or capybara. Then one of the giants shifted position and Brennan's lens focused on a human hand among the cuts of meat, fingers still articulated, wedding band catching the afternoon light. He lowered the glasses with a sound that might have been a sob or a prayer. Richards was already setting up his camera, hands moving with professional efficiency despite their trembling. "Wait," Brennan whispered, but the photographer had committed to his shot. The magnesium powder ignited with a brilliant flash that lit the ridge like lightning. For one frozen heartbeat, the valley fell silent. Then every giant head turned toward them in perfect unison, and Brennan understood they had been noticed in the way a man notices an insect crawling across his dinner table. The giants moved with terrifying coordination, abandoning their work and flowing toward the ridge with the purposeful stride of creatures who had hunted this terrain for generations. Aldridge screamed the order to run, his voice cracking with the loss of all authority, and the expedition scattered into the jungle as the pursuit began in earnest. They ran without strategy or direction, crashing through undergrowth that tore at their clothing and skin. Behind them came the giants, moving through dense vegetation with horrifying efficiency despite their massive frames. Brennan heard them navigating the jungle with practiced ease, their footfalls regular and unhurried, the gait of hunters who knew their prey had nowhere to go. Dr. Henley stumbled over an exposed root and went down hard, crying out as his ankle twisted beneath him. He scrambled to rise, but the giants had closed the distance with impossible speed. Brennan looked back once and saw a massive hand descend toward the botanist's shoulder. Henley's scream began high and desperate, then ended with such abrupt finality that the silence felt like a physical blow. No one stopped running. They fled east through a ravine thick with ferns, Aldridge gasping orders no one could hear over their own ragged breathing. Jensen brought up the rear, his cook's bulk slowing him gradually. Brennan glanced back to check the gap and saw Jensen there, red-faced and laboring. He blinked sweat from his eyes, looked again, and Jensen had simply ceased to exist. No sound, no struggle, just empty jungle where a man had been running seconds before. Graves grabbed Brennan's arm and pulled him around a massive buttress root. "They are hurting us," the former soldier gasped, eyes wild but calculating. "Notice the pattern. They are driving us somewhere specific." The realization settled over Brennan like ice water. The giants weren't simply chasing them. They were being guided toward a destination with the casual expertise of men driving cattle to slaughter. The jungle opened suddenly onto a natural amphitheater ringed by ancient stone walls, and in its center stood the monument from their first night, the 12-foot pillar with its carved figures of submission and consumption. This was the killing ground, prepared long ago and used many times since. Richard stopped to photograph their end, some journalistic instinct overriding survival. He raised his camera toward the approaching giants and never saw the stone that came whistling through the air. The rock struck his skull with a wet crack that echoed off the amphitheater walls, and the photographer collapsed like a puppet with severed strings, camera shattering beside him. The giants emerged from the tree line on three sides, massive figures moving with coordinated precision, cutting off all retreat. 7 of them, perhaps 8, adorned with their bone necklaces and bearing clubs carved from wood hard as iron. They advanced slowly, savoring the moment, and Brennan understood they had done this before, many times, with the same methodical certainty. Graves checked his rifle, counted his remaining ammunition, and looked at the others with something like apology. He stepped forward deliberately, placing himself between the giants and his companions. "Tell them what we found," he said quietly. Then he opened fire, each shot carefully aimed, and charged directly into the line of approaching giants. The rifle cracked 4 times before something enormous struck Graves from the side, lifting him completely off his feet. His body disappeared into the mass of towering figures, and his screams joined the growing collection of sounds Brennan knew he would carry forever. Kaio grabbed Brennan's shoulder and yanked him toward the monument. Behind, he hissed, pulling at carved stone that suddenly shifted to reveal darkness beneath. A hidden passage, narrow and ancient. They plunged into the earth as the giants' triumphant vocalizations shook the jungle canopy above. The darkness swallowed them whole. Brennan followed Kaio through passages carved from living rock, navigating by the brief flare of matches that revealed ancient warning pictographs etched into the walls. Figures fleeing, figures consumed, figures that stood too tall to be human. The images repeated in endless variation, a historical record written in stone by those who had discovered the giants before and barely lived to leave their warning. Behind them, echoing through interconnected chambers, came the sounds of pursuit. The giants knew these tunnels, had hunted here before, and their footfalls reverberated through the earth like the heartbeat of something vast and patient. Brennan counted the remaining matches in his pocket, 11, and knew they would never be enough. They descended through networks that twisted beneath the valley floor, each turn a desperate gamble. Kaio moved with inherited knowledge, reading signs in the darkness that Brennan's Oxford education had never prepared him for. The guide's breathing had grown labored, and blood darkened his shirt from wounds taken during their flight through the jungle. Hours dissolved into timeless dark. They crawled through spaces barely wide enough for shoulders, felt ahead for drops that might plunge into nothing. Once they heard something massive moving through a parallel chamber, its breath echoing like wind through a cathedral, and they froze until the sound faded into deeper earth. The passage constricted to a point where Brennan had to exhale completely to squeeze through, stones scraping his ribs raw. He emerged gasping into a marginally wider tunnel and turned to help Kaio, but the guide had stopped at the narrow gap. Beyond him, growing closer, came the pursuit. Kaio pressed Brennan's journal into his hands, the leather cover still intact despite everything. "You write what happened," he said quietly. "You tell the truth so others know not to come." Brennan tried to pull him through, but Kaio pushed back with surprising strength. "Too narrow for the tall ones," he explained. "I hold them here while you run to daylight." The cartographer wanted to argue, to refuse, but Kaio's hand found his face in the darkness, touching his forehead in what might have been blessing. "The map ends here for me," he whispered. "You carry it forward. Now go before I lose my courage." Brennan went, stumbling through passages that climbed gradually toward air and light. Behind him rose sounds he would never speak of, Kaio's voice raised in defiance of his people's ancient enemy, then silenced with terrible finality. He ran until darkness turned gray, then emerged blinking into afternoon sun at the edge of a river gorge miles from where they had descended. Fever claimed him 2 days later. Rubber tappers found him collapsed on a trail, delirious and babbling about monuments and bone-eaters. They carried him downriver to Manaus, where doctors treated jungle fever and dismissed his ravings as fever dreams. Months passed before his hands stopped shaking enough to write. He filed his official report with the Royal Geographical Society, a document citing tropical disease and unfortunate accidents, recommending the region remain unsurveyed due to hostile terrain. The report was accepted without question, but in his rooms at night, Brennan wrote a second account in precise, meticulous detail. Every discovery, every death, every impossible truth. He sealed it with instructions to his solicitor to be opened 50 years hence, when those who might call him mad were themselves dust. The final entry described his nightmares, the monument rising through mist, Webb's tools arranged with inhuman care, and the certain knowledge that the giants remained there still, patient and undiscovered in their kingdom of bone, waiting for the next expedition foolish enough to push into spaces the map should have left forever blank. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this account of the Amazon's giant humanoids, please like, comment, and subscribe to support the channel. Your support helps us bring more of these incredible stories to life.